Hello, my name is Mike McKee, and today I'd like to talk about some of the interesting features and some of the more useful aspects of Alteryx. Today, we're going to talk about control containers. Control containers are a relatively new feature in Alteryx, and control containers were really meant to replace the block until done tool. As with all my other trainings, I have attached a data file. The input data are the different data sets that we're going to use. Output data is where you can put things. And session 1 is kind of the answer key for this whole thing. Now, I have no homework for this one. This one's a pretty straightforward. All right, let's go ahead and get started. First thing I need to do is I'm going to bring in some input data here. Right? Now, for the purposes of what we're doing here, the input data really doesn't matter. Right? So I'm going to bring in, stores north. I'm going to bring in another input data, which is going to be stores south. Another input data, which will be the last stores west. Right now, the details of the data files themselves and what I'm bringing in don't matter all that much. For the purposes of this is really just to illustrate the control containers. And these files can be any segment of data in your workflow from anywhere at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and output this data. Simple and easy. And I'm going to go ahead and output it to a specific folder. You set up a connection, an Excel file, my control containers data output, and we'll just call this output. I'm going to call this north, the north file. All right, I run this, and it runs no problems. Now I'm going to go ahead and drag another output data down. And I'm going to do the same thing, set up a connection. I'm going to write to the same file. I'm going to go ahead and just use a different tab in this to be south. And then run that. Whoops. Let me go ahead and not create new sheet, but overwrite it. And some of my prior trainings, I told you you'd run into this a lot. Overwrite it and run. And what you note is that this file grabs its data and writes to the output. And it's writing to this output, and it wrote to that file no problems. And you can see I've got the north file all written there. But what happens is while this is writing to this file, this data comes in and this tries to write. And it can't open that file because it's already being used by another process. So the problem here is that I can't write to two different tabs in a file because the first write is holding that file open, so the second write can't write to it. Now, you never know which one of these is going to write first because it all depends upon when the data reaches the input connector. But Alteryx now has a resolution to that. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click this container, and I'm going to add a new control container. Right-click this, and add a new control container. Okay? Now, what the control container does is, let me go ahead and turn this one off and run this. If there is nothing connected to the input, it pretty much runs just like a regular container that we've talked about before. Note that it does have an input and an output connector. And if I look at that output connector, it tells me a little bit about what's going on in that container itself. So the container was activated, I had a file output, it wrote to that file, and then the container completed. When all the tools in this container finish, all of them, it doesn't matter what the tools are, then it writes to the output, but not before. Right? Now, the benefit to this is that if a container has a connection to the input, the container won't start until there is data on the input. So, if I run these, you'll note it's exactly the same. It writes to this, the file's open, and it won't do this. However, if I cascade these and now run them, note that everything runs. I go ahead and open that. I've got my north and my south. So what's happening is that the data is coming into this. This control container has no connection into it, so it runs just like a regular container. When everything in this container is finished, you'll notice an output here. This container activates when it receives something. So everything in here finishes, you have an output. That output goes to this container, and then this container then runs. Right? Note that if I bring another output data down here, set up a connection, and I'm going to put this as the west sheet and hook that up, I'm going to get the exact same behavior with this not being in a container. I run. Oh, this one actually ran first this time, held it open so these didn't run. So I put this in a control container. I cascade this along. I run. Whoop, same thing. Overwrite the existing sheet. And now everything runs cleanly. Right? So this really, all three tabs, this really replaces the block until done tool. You don't need that. It's a lot more flexible, a lot easier to work with, and you're simply not going to need it anymore. Now, there's a lot of interesting things that I can do with this, right? So let's say, all right, I've got my file writing here, and everything runs just fine. But what I'm going to do is instead of overwriting the sheet, I'm going to create a sheet, which I know will give me an error, and I run that. And now this gives me an error. Everything else runs fine. When I look at my output here, I get an error on the message. Right? Note that this ran, and then it cascaded and this ran. Now, if I take a filter tool and I drop that in here, because this is just another connection in Alteryx, and I'm going to go ahead and look at the output here, and message type equals error. So I'm going to say message type equals error. And I run this. I get my error here, which then comes here, which then activates this, and we move on. And this goes ahead and it writes that file. Now, if I go ahead and fix this, and I run it, whoop, let me throw another filter on here for what I'm going to do next. There we go, and run it. You'll notice that this gets it right. I don't get an error. So no error comes out here. And this doesn't ever write. So this control container is never activated because this right here never gave me that output. Now, if I look at the output here, it just says file output. Let me copy that. And I'm going to come to this filter and say message type equals file output. And run it. So now what happens is this will run because the output of this is giving me the file output, which then comes into this true anchor and runs this container. So what I can have here is I can have a conditional run. Depending upon the results of this container, if the file gives me an error, it runs this. If the file doesn't give me an error, it runs this. Now, again, I'm just using kind of artificial inputs. So, in your workflow, you'd use this functionality to determine whatever is appropriate. If this container gives you an error, you might have a separate workflow that runs that does something. If this container doesn't give you an error, then you'll have this container that runs as appropriate. Right? All right. Now, let's take a look at that in a slightly different context. I'm going to go ahead and bring in two input datas. Right, this one right here. I'm going to go to Files, select a file, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in my Colorado Stores North. This file right here, I'm going to go ahead and set up a connection. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in my sales data. I'm going to run that. So I've got my store information with the stores. I've got my sales data. I'm going to go ahead and go to a join tool here. I'm going to join by store number. Right? And I'm just going to kind of head this off. We note that in one file, it's a double. The left one, in the right file, it is a V string. And so it's not going to join cleanly. I need to put a select tool, and I can't change it here because that only impacts the join data and not what comes in. So I'll go to preparation, and I will go ahead and grab a select tool and drop it on here. And I will change this to a VW string or V string. Then when I run it, my J anchor's got a bunch of stuff. My left anchor has nothing, but my right anchor has information. So what I can do is I can say, okay, I'm going to write some data out. So let me go to my data output and my data output here and my data output here. All right. And then I'm going to say, this is going to be my results 1. And results 1. This is going to be results 2. And results 2. And this is going to be results 3. And these would be the exceptions, what didn't join. And then I'm going to run all those. Right? Creates all those individual files. No problems. Right? But one of the things that I note is that in my left output, there is no data. And so when I look at my file, it's just a blank file. And I may not want that. So what I can do is I can go ahead and I can put this in a control container. And I can connect it to my left output. And then I put this in a control container. And I'm going to connect this to my middle output. And throw this in a control container. And hook that to my right output. So now what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, clean this up a little bit. What I'm saying here is that if there is data on any one of these anchors, it'll activate the control container and this will run. So when I run this, but gotta fix this. So overwrite, overwrite, overwrite. All right. So if I look at my left output here, no data, nothing went into the control container, and this did not run. So the control container never actually activated. You look at the output here, there's nothing. There is data here. That reached the control container. This ran and wrote the file. And there's the output. And the same thing here, my exceptions. There was data there, activated the container, wrote the data. So bottom line, what I'm trying to illustrate here is you have the control containers that can be used in a couple different ways. You can use some aspect of your data to go ahead and activate the containers to do different treatments or to run different processes. Or you can cascade the containers just to write to different sheets in a spreadsheet, simple and easy. Or use the messages from the containers to go ahead and do filters or whatnot. And you could, of course, add more tools in here. I just did this for simple illustration to go ahead and activate containers based upon the results of this container. So a lot of different ways you can do this. It allows you to stage your data and it allows you to conditionally run different aspects of it. All right. I hope you guys have learned a bunch about the control containers, and I hope this allows you to get rid of all those block until done tools and use this. In addition, this has all the same features of the container. You can colorize it and stuff. You can turn it off and on, and you can also minimize or maximize it. So a regular container on steroids. All right. Thank you guys very much. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.